Hi.
Oh my gosh, I made it work. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
That's good. So we're gonna wait a couple more minutes to have more people trickle down.
Okay.
How are you doing?
I've been great. I actually was able to get a bunch of things done for the house and, with kids stuff. So I feel like I got my daily normal work done. So this is great. I'm actually really excited to be here.
Oh.
Can you still see me?
Yes, can you see me?
Um, no, but I could see myself, but I'm frozen for some reason. Hold on. Okay, there you are. I can see you now.
Okay.
How's your morning?
Okay. It's going good. I can't complain. I wish the weather was a little bit nicer.
Yes. It was actually quite nice to be out there. Actually, I went outside for a walk and sit outside, and it was cloudy, which is good. But I know rain. I think the rain is coming down, so very nice. So you wrote out these really amazing questions. I was really happy to see that you kind of had your thoughts together.
Yes, because this is going to be a great conversation. I'm really excited. I'm grateful that you are here. So why don't we start? It is 12. Do you want
Okay.
to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarin Cheung. I live in Westport, Connecticut. I'm one of the six organizers of the past Saturday Stop Asian Hate gathering in Westport. I've been following you guys, Live Girl, for years, as long as you've been, you know, um, together. And I've just been really inspired by a lot of things, everything that you do, all the way from, connecting with Sherry, all the way from people who have reached out to me. I'm actually mentoring a couple college students at this point, but I'm really excited that you're giving me this opportunity to come and talk to you about this. And I think it'll be interesting to hear, afterwards what feedbacks or questions you may have. So, yeah.
Yes. So welcome everyone. This is going to be a Listen, Learn, Act conversation series Instagram Live. So I will be your host. My name is Kelly Taylor, excuse me, and I am the Quality Inclusion Intern. So today we're going to be talking about AAPI hate. And let's go into the first question that I have for you is please take a moment to educate our audience on what is AAPI and AAPI racism.
So AAPI stands for Asian American Pacific Islander. So what it is really is just racism against this group of people. So just solely because you're Asian American, you're from the Pacific Island, it's just discriminating and racism against this group of people.
And during COVID, have you experienced or know of anyone personally that experienced AAPI racism?
Actually, no, luckily, no. But at the same time, because of COVID, I've been pretty much living like a hermit, for the last year or so. And, but, I'm just still very disturbed by all the images that I'm seeing all across the country, especially the recent one, which is the one that happened in New York City on Monday, attacking a 65-year-old Filipino woman. It's just really heartbreaking to see. And I just I can't imagine. It's not, we need to stop that.
What do you think has triggered this negative interaction of AAPI racism?
So this is this is going to be a long answer. So bear with
That's
me.
fine. We have time.
I'm going to try to give you guys a sense of where this is coming from and kind of why this is happening, right? So maybe you heard this before, maybe you haven't. And I think most of people have not, but me, myself included, I've just been reminded of these things in the last couple of months. But there's a notion in this country that it's almost like a stereotype that when you see an Asian person, you instantly think of that person as a foreigner. And the term that's been used is the perpetual foreigner um, stereotype that we have in this country. And what it is basically seeing an Asian American person never really believing that person is American. And that, when you meet someone for the first time, right, what's the normal thing you say? Hey, where are you from? Right? And my answer would be like, I'm from Connecticut. And conversation goes on from there and you learn about, your family, your kids, your whatever. But some people would say, no, but really, where are you from? You know? And that becomes sort of a racist piece already in of itself, because they never believe that you are actually from Connecticut, and they would want to know what part of Asia you're from. And that is something that needs to change. I think that is a perception that most people here have in this country. And I'll explain to you why this is happening. But that is like one of the things. So for example, Asian American has actually been in America for a very long time. We've been here since 1850s in the gold rush, right? The 49ers, as you know, the football team. That is really where Asian Americans have arrived, is really to seek opportunities. And so did many other countries came here just for that opportunity. And, we were here for the gold rush. We were a part of the building the railroads on the West Coast specifically. So that's when America was like, hey, we need more we need workers. And so a lot of people from China came and really be a part of the building the railroads for America. And that's when the infrastructure of America really started. That was like in the 1850-ish. Then, the history kind of goes from there. And I think this is the part where people don't really know, because it's really not taught in the school, is that in 1882, the United States actually passed an act, which is basically called the Exclusion Act, of Chinese Exclusion Act. And that is to say that if you're from China or, in that area, you're not allowed to come to the US as an immigrant. And that is the first time that this country actually excluded a specific race, as part of coming to America. And from there on, it was, a lot of other stuff, like Japanese were in this internment camps, which, lasted for several years, on and on. But it wasn't really until about the civil rights movement around 1965-ish, when things starts moving kind of along the way, where more immigrants were coming from Asia. And that at that time, there were more like skilled workers, right? Doctors, teachers, nurses. And then they started bringing their families. And so kind of like the immigration started then. But, the point is, we are perceived as perpetual foreigner, but it's really not true, because we've been here for a very long time. And the other thing that I want to point out is that this is also the other stereotype, is that people think of Asians as, quiet, right? Not vocal. We just put our head down, do our work. We do a good job, sometimes. Sometimes we don't. But the perception is that we are a hard worker. We don't make a fuss. We're always sort of quiet. And it makes us seem like we're invisible, right? We just kind of get through, and we want to make our family lives better and whatsoever. But that is another problem, because, it's sort of spiral, right? So you have people think of you as a foreigner, and then you and yourself are perceived as being quiet and not speaking up. It makes us an easier target, I guess, to be singled out, right? So I think that is really the main thing, that racism against Asian American has always been there. It's just that it's not really been much published or reported or prosecuted and whatever. There's a case back in like 1980s where Vincent Chin was another person who actually was killed because he was mistaken as a Japanese person when in fact he was Chinese. Nothing really came about that. The prosecution didn't really take a serious punishment toward the people that actually killed him. So it's sort of like been going on and on and on. And then it really escalated during the last year with COVID. And I think with that, it's just become a lot more aware. Like people like me, we're starting to feel like, being attacked by people who don't really understand. Maybe they don't know, attacking elderlies and vulnerable people. It's just really hard to watch. And I think a lot of times we are now coming out and speaking out a little bit just because of that. It's really to make sure that doesn't happen, and also for the next generation, right? So making sure that our kids, and also their friends are going to be more educated and also, more aware. So this really needs to stop the cycle, because the cycle doesn't end. So sorry, it's like a long answer to your very simple question, but it's sort of, needed a little information, because I also think that without having the right education, put in place, it's really hard for, even my friends who they don't know better couldn't be blamed for not helping, right? So we need to start in the education. I think this is where a lot of the movement that you're seeing, like Stop Asian Hate, is coming about. It's really not just reporting stuff that's happening, but also providing resources and places that you can actually safely speak about this, and have an open dialogue.
No, you did amazing. That history lesson was needed. I think a lot of people, a lot of my students students and young ladies my age, we don't really know the history. And I kind of want to dive deeper back into your answer. Why don't you think schools teach Asian American history or Pacific Islander history and know the real truth about Asians and all the hard work that they've done for the United States?
That's a great question. And we're trying to change that. But I think personally, this is just my thinking, I think it's because of the awareness, right? We are always seen as invisible. We've always been somewhat successful, right? And people say, sometimes I hear these students who are high school students will say to me, just because I'm Asian, I'm almost like felt like I have a higher standards. I need to outperform because that's the expectation of me. And for them who told me the stories, like that is not true. I work so hard to get the grades that I get, not because I'm Asian. I just work hard like everyone. And so I think that the piece of being invisible and being felt as if we don't need help, right? We don't need to be singled out for help and whatever, makes it seems like it's not as relevant to teach, right, in the schools. And I heard the statistics recently about kind of even like social economics type of thing where the government or federal helps money would go into fund some group of people, and Asian Americans are always kind of in the smaller allocation to these funds. And so again, it comes back to being invisible, being, kind of like not really there. But the problem with racism against Asian Americans, Pacific Islander, has always been there. It is nothing new. And so it just hasn't really been discussed, right? And it's kind of like, culturally, I don't want to blame it on culture, but I also, me myself, guilty, is that we are just sort of like, try to let it go, do your best. Don't make a fuss, don't complain, work harder. And that worked, that's great. And I think I would completely still embrace all of that, but I just feel like, the piece about being invisible needs to go away. And it needs to be, there is a real problem. We need to start acknowledging it first, and then we can actually do something about it.
Thank you. So recently, the video is trending. It's called "Is This Patriot Enough?" Asian American official shows military scars condemning racist violence. And he touched bases what you said. And I honestly, if any of the audience member have time, look at the video. It is very powerful. This elected official, he actually has cuts from the military and the battle wounds. And he talks about being invisible and enough is enough of Asian hate, and condemning racism. Definitely check out that video. I know it's definitely trending on YouTube. Okay, so the next question we have for you is, I understand that racism takes up all forms. Not only is it physical. Have you experienced any negative interaction that could be attributed to racism?
So before I answer that, I just want to add one more point to what we were discussing earlier. I think what is not helping is what kids and people in general are seeing kind of like in social media, in the media itself, right? So if you're seeing kind of the same images or the same messages going on and on and on, it makes you believe that that's okay, right? That's okay to do, that's the norm to do. And I think that only allow people to continue certain acts that are hurtful. And I just want to draw actually two examples that I could think of. And again, going back to the invisible being the quiet. So like you guys probably all know this movie Pitch Perfect, right? So I don't even know if you know this, but there is an Asian American character in there, and she doesn't speak. She has no line, So that is, again, right? People are watching this. Teenagers are watching this. that is not okay. And also, there's this thing called mochi and waffle, right? And the recently with Mrs. Obama's initiative. So mochi, or is it waffle or mochi? I cannot remember the order. But again, mochi doesn't speak, right? Mochi is like, it's a dessert. It's basically like we like to eat it, and it's an Asian dessert. And mochi doesn't have a voice, right? Waffle does, right? Um, Although mochi might have a nice character or a personality, but mochi doesn't speak. So that is something that, we just, you might not think it's something mean or bad or intentional, but it's always subtly, it's always there. And now coming to your question, me myself, I have not had any experience for violent type of racism against me or my family, which is I'm very grateful for. But the subtle piece is always there. And I can think back to when I was working. When I met Sherry, I was actually working for her at General Electric. And at that time, I really didn't know much about, racism or how like we have like glass ceiling with women, all this stuff. I think I was kind of naive myself, but Sherry saw in me, which is something I didn't even see in myself. And basically, she was the person who actually encouraged me and, like promoted me and basically was like my biggest mentor. And at the time, I didn't know this. I was just kind of like, oh yeah, I work for Sherry. She's so cool, whatever. But looking back at it, it's like at the workforce, there are people who would be like either pushing back or they're giving me feedback about my performance. And they would say things to me like, you need to be more assertive. You need to be more outspoken. But the problem is that's just not me. That's not my personality. I don't kind of like, the loud voice is not like me. I don't do that. And I think that is something that is so important because I didn't see at that time. But because I had Sherry who was like, hey, you can do this. Like she was my biggest cheerleader even before I knew it. So I think that is really important. And there's a lot of subtleness that actually happened in my life later on. Like could be just as simple as like, my husband and I went to a restaurant and there was like all these empty tables, but we weren't even acknowledged we were there. They didn't seat us. But at the time, again, we're like, whatever, we'll go to another place. No big deal. We kind of like just shook it off and walked away. But those were things that, you remember and that, hey, there were other tables, everyone else got seated. So, something, and I know like at the rally on Saturday, we had these 5 students from Staple High School in our town that actually so bravely share their experiences. And they, one kid started off by saying something like, for a long time, I wish I was white. And that would have been much easier. Like that was his opening. And to me, it just really stuck with me, like very, very much. And I could only sense their pain, right? Growing up, but not really having anyone to talk to or talk about. And I can only imagine my own kids, right? They're now in elementary, and I didn't want them to do that. I don't want them to have that experience. So, so yes, absolutely more subtle, but nothing violent to answer your question.
And I want to add, you touched on in your answer. You talked about Pitch Perfect and how there is an Asian descent actress and she's muted. And recently, the other day, I was on Clubhouse and one lady brought up Hello Kitty and how she's originally from Japan, but she's also quiet as well and she's muted.
Yes.
So those also, I'm noticing more of that. And I think our audience will take away things that I didn't even realize until you mentioned and brought it back to me. And, oh, wow, like there is a sense of Asian culture in Pacific Island as quiet or muted or head down and nothing else, or they have no voice. And that's definitely not okay and definitely something we need to change.
Absolutely.
So the next question is, what is next after what is next after the rally? Because as our audience may not have known, but last week you organized a rally and a visual for the victims that died in Atlanta and also put awareness for Asian hate.
Yes. So the rally was actually organized in about 6 days. It was really me and 5 other friends in town. We basically had the same kind of concern and we wanted to get the community together. We were so happy to see so many people came, right, including Senator Blumenthal, Attorney General William Tong, many other community members that were there. So we had a really good event. What we did, the first thing we did was rest it. So we took a day off, me and my organizers, and we kind of debriefed a little bit. I think we're at the point where we're trying to figure out what is the best thing we can do to make the most impact. But for the time being, what we have done is we've actually reached out to our local school districts, or our Board of Education members, or superintendent, and some of our school teachers and administrators. And basically, we're trying to do two things, and kind of like long-term and short-term, right? So the long-term goal is really to make sure, like we talked about a little bit, is to have the education, right? To be able to say, what is really Asian American history? Where have we been, and what is the problem now, and how can we fix it? That's in the long term. And actually, I was made aware of a petition that actually just passed in the state a couple of days ago that will include Asian American history in the curriculum in the state of Connecticut, which I was just so excited to hear. So that was one. That's a big longer term project. Two is kind of like short term, right? What can we do now? What are the low hanging fruit that we can actually just go for it? And one of the things that we're trying to do is we're trying to just have every single classroom teachers, to the extent that possible, have a conversation about this current event with their classrooms, whether or not you have Asian American students in your class or not, or you want to kind of piggyback on someone else who does in your classroom. We want the schools to empower their staff to do so, and then make sure that they're supported so that they don't feel like they're going to be blamed for saying something, or hurtful for someone else. So that is sort of the short term. But I think what I want to leave with you guys, though, is this group of girls in your organization, is that no matter you're Asian or not Asian, now that you heard this, right, now you kind of hear all our conversation just now, and also all the things that you've been reading or listening in the news or whatsoever. You start with a conversation, right? You basically say to each other, how does it make you feel? Like, listening to all this stuff, what does it make you feel? And if you don't know the history of it, you want to know more about it, there's always places to go, right? And I'm happy to connect with you later on, give you some material so that you can share among yourselves. But really, to have a conversation, that's a start. Because I remember 2 weeks ago when all this stuff started happening, the Atlanta shooting. I have so many friends in my community that had either didn't reach out because they didn't know what to say. They didn't want to say the wrong thing, right? To the people who just called and said, how are you, right? To people in between that called and like go around the bushes and talk about everything else. And then finally, I'm like, I gotta run. And they're like, oh, by the way, how are you, right? So I feel like the conversation start is always hard. But I think as an Asian American myself, if I were the recipient of that reach out, I would embrace it. And I actually would encourage you guys to do so. So have a conversation, and then stand up for people who are being heard, right? Speak out. I think that is the most important thing that you can do, that you can make an impact immediately. It's not going to be solved just because of the hashtag and whatever, all this stuff that's going on. And all of a sudden there's a lot of attention, but it's going to take time. But I think this is the moment that I feel like, Asian Americans never really spoken out like this. And we are really energized. Like, I think we wanted to tell our stories, and we want it to be heard, and we want it to be sort of actionable. And just to kind of leave you guys with a real example, it's like, when you talk to people in a normal, in your school days or whatever, and because you've learned a lot about, like, maybe say, for example, Black American history, right? So like the origins, what not to say, the words that you should not be saying, right? To call out people, and that is not okay, and that's racist. But you don't know what those words are for Asians, and that you need to learn, right? There's so many. I mean, I didn't want to say on here, but I feel like there's a lot of words that you might not even know it's racist, and you're saying it because you were never told. So this is where we start the conversation, is to have that knowledge and to continue it, right? And then just to be in it and make a commitment. So thank you.
You're welcome. I just want to just announce one more thing for our audience. You were featured in this past March 27th article, Connecticut Post article, "We Must Stop Asian Hate. State Leaders Join Westport Residents to Condemn Hate Against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders." And you said in particular, and I want to end off this call with your quote, you said, "I believe change can happen, and it starts with a conversation of like-minded people locking arms, working towards one purpose." So, ladies and gentlemen, this has been Listen, Learn, Act Conversation Series, Instagram version. Live Girl, we believe the conversation is the catalyst of change. And we are so happy, Serene, that you are here and took time out of your busy schedule to talk to our Live Girls about AAPI and what the meaning of it, as well as the history, as well as listening, learning, and unacting, and then acting on what we just heard so we can make a better, inclusive world for our girls as well as everyone. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a good day. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
Take
Thank you
care.
for joining.
Okay. Bye now.